Right. Hello, hello. Well, thank you for joining me. My name is Ben. I'm the lead technical consultant within our Bristol office. My speciality is in security, so you are in good hands. I hope everybody is well. I can see people are still filtering in, which is fine. So today's webinar is essentially going to be about information security, what you should be doing to prevent your information from getting into the wrong hands, how you can prevent that, and how you can prevent your business's information from getting into the wrong hands. There's going to be a Q&A session at the end. Please submit your questions to the Q&A button. It should be at the bottom of your screen, and then I will get to those at the end. So this webinar is going to be in two parts, really. The first part, I'm going to be going over some kind of information governance and some just top level information with regards to security governance. We'll be delving a little bit deeper in this one into data classification. Obviously, security governance is a huge subject. And I think eventually I'd like to do some more webinars to kind of cover most of those. But for this one, I'm going to start off with a bit of an overview of information governance. And then, as I said, delve a little bit deeper into data classification. The second part of the webinar is going to be talking more about the technical controls, talking about how Microsoft 365 specifically can help you achieve these goals and help you with your information security. So what is security information and governance? So it's defined as the collection of practices relating to supporting, evaluating, defining and directing the security efforts of an organization. Information governance comes from the top. So it's different from looking at kind of the IT side of things. It's not kind of your IT team boots on the ground. This is looking at governance from the top. So this is something that needs to come from and be agreed with the senior management team of an organization. You know, we're looking at policy changes, we're looking at, you know, processes that come from the top, all of which needs to be, you know, signed off and agreed to by the senior management. And, you know, the reasons for that is that they are the ones who are liable for the data. Security shouldn't really be thought of as just an IT thing. It should be thought as a business operation, and as I've mentioned in a previous webinar before, you know, security should have its own budget. It shouldn't necessarily be a part of the IT budget, as you know, as we'll go through in a minute. There's a number of aspects of it, and as I said, the first part of this is talking about information governance, which you know, although there's aspects of it within IT, it is in fact a business operation. Information governance, the idea is that it ensures that the alignment of the security function aligns with the business strategies, the goals of the business and the business's objectives. You know, you can't be having these two aspects of the business security and the operational side, you know, clashing. It all needs to work together. The security side of it needs to ensure that the business can continue running and run to the best of its ability while ensuring that it's safe and secure, and that all of that information and all of the business, the, you know, critical business operations can run effectively. So yeah, as I said, there is a number of aspects to security governance. Today we're having a look at information security kind of specifically, and again within that, data classification. So why is your information data so important? for almost all organizations, your data is your business. To give kind of some examples, KFC have got their 7 herbs and spices. That's probably locked away in a safe somewhere. Coca-Cola has their recipe locked away somewhere. It's their organization. And I know they're very big organizations to give examples of, but every single organization has an element of data that their business relies on, and that the business could and possibly will fall apart if something happened to it. Your list of clients, who you need to invoice, your staff and your clients' personal information, payroll information, even down to kind of blueprints, proprietary designs, things that make your business your business. They're your unique selling point. Information that if it got in the hands of either a competitor or someone who had malicious intent could destroy the business. So I suppose to think about your data within your organization, what would happen to your organization if that data just disappeared, was just gone, and what would happen if someone with malicious intent got hold of all that data? What are the consequences there? What could happen? Could your company still run? How effective would it be? Would your clients still trust you? What other consequences are there? So information is important, and it's one of, if not the most important asset that your company will have, likely behind the staff. So information management. So using governance and technical tools to manage and secure your data. They come as a partnership, and another way of kind of describing the governance tools would be administrative tools. So we're looking at kind of policies, processes. We'll get onto that a little bit more in a minute. But when we're looking at information management, what is it that we need to do? We're kind of talking about the path that you need to take to classify that data, know what you've got. So obviously the first step will be information discovery, knowing what information you've got. I would imagine there is a lot of organizations that have got information everywhere, data everywhere, documents everywhere, who don't necessarily know what they have. And that can be a problem for a number of reasons. First and foremost, GDPR. If you've got data that breaches GDPR and you don't know where it is, then that is a breach of GDPR. Assign ownership. So who has ownership of that data? Whose responsibility is that data? Moving on to defining sensitive data. What in your organization would be classed as sensitive data? And again, these are bullet points of slides that I'll be going through in more detail. Defining classification labels, classifying that data, and then making sure that data is protected. So within information governance, we tend to look at an information lifecycle. You'll have to excuse the blurriness of that photo. It was the best I could find. But yeah, when we look at information, we don't, the majority of us don't consider it too much. We make a file and we store it somewhere that we assume is safe. But when we're looking at information governance, and when we're looking at that data lifecycle, then we need to consider all of these parts in one way or another. From creating that data all the way to the end, which is destroying it. And all of those steps need to be secure, they need to be considered, and they need to have processes. Again, the information lifecycle is a whole nother subject. Each one of these aspects has got a lot to it. So I won't be going through all of these in this one, but I think it's good to know that there is an information lifecycle that companies should be working towards using to manage their data. So information discovery. We'll use this as, this is a precursor to data classification. You need to know what you have. You need to know what data you hold. You need to know where that data is. You need to know who has access to that data. You need to know why you have it. Are you in breach of GDPR? And most of these questions above, if you can't answer a huge amount of those, then, again, there's the potential for there to be, a breach of GDPR. You might have too much information. You might have more information than you need, more personal information than you need, in which case, this is a good opportunity to get rid of that information, to securely remove it. So, discovering that information, it can be a long process, and you can see why you need senior management involved. There's going to be a huge amount of information on your system that, the IT company, IT staff, admin staff who, you might ask to do tasks like, information discovery. They can't necessarily do it because they don't, or at least shouldn't have access to some of that data. Whereas senior management should. It's not necessarily the job of senior management, but it's for them to acknowledge and delegate and understand the risks and the benefits of doing this. So yeah, do you still need those old archives? Yeah, we've all got data sitting on a hard drive somewhere. Those old backups, are they still useful? Again, if they're not being used, then it's a potential risk. If that old hard drive went missing, what's on there? If you don't need it anymore, then get rid of it, obviously securely. So information discovery, we need to do this and know what information we have and know what information is where before we can classify that data. And how that is done is up to you. You can create again a secure spreadsheet. There is tools that can help you discover information. We'll get onto Microsoft 365 in a bit, but there is a information discovery options within that. Again, all the tools are designed to aid you, but not do it for you. So it's a bit of a task, but it's one that's well worth it. So the next thing is data ownership. So whose responsibility is it? Responsibility is the data. As I said, data ownership is another subject within information governance that we could go into, and there is a huge amount to it. But I won't be going into it in this one. I think the things to know is that it's everybody's responsibility. The ownership of the data sits with senior management, as I said. And the reason is that they are liable. If there's a breach, then the Information Commissioner's Office will be speaking to senior management, not the members of staff. It's down to the senior management to ensure that staff and lower management are following rules and are taking data security seriously. But as far as security concerns and as far as data and responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody should be responsible for that data. If there's information that you are looking at that you feel that you shouldn't be seeing, then that's your responsibility to speak to senior management and let them know. If there's information within a folder that you feel that everyone can see, it's your responsibility to make sure that doesn't go any further, to make sure that gets locked down. So it's everybody's responsibility. But yeah, it's for senior management to kind of enforce that. So moving on to defining the sensitive data. So what is sensitive data? There is no one answer, although obviously there is sensitive data that is identical across the board, and that is mostly personal identifiable information. And again, within the UK and Europe, GDPR is regulating that and ensuring that that is taken seriously, which again we do a lot better these days, and there's no breaches that are deliberate anymore, really. It's all accidental. So when it comes to personal identifiable information, we should know what we're looking at, and we should already kind of have that in a safe place. But again, when we look back at finding that information, we need to make sure that all of that PII is safe. So other types of sensitive data, anything that's confidential to your business, any proprietary information, as I said before, those trade secrets, any protected information, or any data that is precious to the organization, any data that needs to be protected. And again, for one company, some of that, that same type of data might be publicly available. For other companies, that might be top secret information. So it is down to each individual organization to define sensitive data. And obviously this should be done again at a top level, should be written into policies, and made sure that it is something that's again taken seriously, and processes should be created to define that data. So once that sensitive data has been identified and listed, then we move on to the data classification. So what is data classification? So classifying data, it's the identification of the value of the data to an organization. And obviously we've gone over sensitive data, but there is, there's a number of steps and there's a number of data classifications. So the company then needs to define the classification labels. We've all seen the in the films top secret stamped on things, and top secret is a data classification, but that tends to be more used for kind of military and government. Civilian organizations don't tend to use top secret and secret. Civilian organizations tend to use the following. So confidential. So this would be the highest level. Loss or leak of this data could cause grave or terminal damage to the organization. Private, loss or leak of this data could cause serious damage to the organization. It's often classified for personally identifiable information. And one thing I didn't really mention is obviously with information, it can also be dictated by various regulations, healthcare, financial bits like that. So again, when you are classifying that data, you make sure that you research your regulations. Sensitive information, so loss or leak of this data could potentially compromise the organization. So this could be something along the lines of IT information. It could be data that while if it just got leaked, or if a member of staff came across it, they probably wouldn't be able to do too much about it. But if someone who had certain knowledge, with IP addresses, hackers, then they could potentially use that information to compromise. So one of the one major aspect of hacking is something called social engineering, and hackers will try to call organizations, to call members of staff to try and get information from them, and they will try to manipulate those people. They'll try to pretend to be somebody else, and if they get their hands on sensitive information from within the organization, that makes that job significantly easier. As far as members of staff are concerned, if somebody knows that information, then they've got to be who they say they are. So it's important that all of these are looked at. And then public data, it's exactly what it says on the tin. Publicly available information or information that it wouldn't make any difference if it got out, or again, information that is free to distribute. It could be product documentation, catalogs, etc. So when you're defining your classification labels, these are obviously the most commonly used, but you don't have to use these. Obviously, you can use whatever you want. If you think of other labels that mean more to your organization, and there might be a specific type of data that you have as an organization that would require either a specific title or in addition to these four, for example. So again, it comes from creating those policies on data classification. It needs to be right for your organization. It's not going to be a one size fits all. So now that you've classified, now you've got those data classification labels ready, it's time to go through the previous steps and classify the data that you've identified, and assigning labels to that. So again, it can be a long process, and it depends on how much data you've got, but it's one of those things that once it's done, it's done. And it's worth doing. And I suppose, what does it mean to put labels on there? And I suppose as things are, not much. This is the element where the administrative controls, or where the data governance will cross with the technical side of things. So we move on to protecting that data. So once we've got that data classified, what do we do with it? And there's a couple of things that we'll do to protect that data, and that is to use administrative controls and technical controls. So administrative controls will be, well, I'll move on to the next slide. Administrative controls are information government policies. So defining those policies, defining what can be done with that data, defining what that data is, and using governance to keep that data safe, and tell members of staff what they can and can't do with it. Creating policies off this covers the due diligence. If you've got a member of staff that says, I didn't know I couldn't do that, then you're covering your back by saying that, well, that you've got written policies. Processes, so information handling processes, any information that comes in from now on, what happens to it, how's it handled, how does the information life cycle fit around that, and implementing governance techniques. So there's a number of techniques that are used within organizations. Policies of least privilege. So if those who don't need access to it don't have access to it, if you don't need that privilege, if you don't need an administrative account, if you don't need access to accounts, then you shouldn't have access to it. It closes a lot of potential doors, a lot of potential windows for attack if not everybody has access to everything. If one person got breached, then it doesn't mean that everything has been breached. It just means that the person who has access, or that person, the only things that will be breached are what they have access to. So minimizing that is ideal. And the other two kind of follow along with that. Need to know basis. If you don't need that information, you shouldn't have access to it. Those who don't need it don't have access to it. So again, it's just a case of closing that surface area of attack. And separation of duties. This is a slightly different one, where what this looks for is making sure that one person within an organization can't do too much damage. And obviously we'd all like to hope that someone wouldn't internally deliberately do anything to kind of hurt the organization, but it happens a lot. And also accidental. So separation of duties means that one person doesn't have too much control, and one kind of example of that would be, in your finance team, ideally you wouldn't have one person to create invoices and one person to pay invoices. There's been issues in the past and reports that you hear of, that same person creating false invoices and then paying them, and it just happens to go into their bank account. So we need to be able to trust people, but we also need to protect ourselves, in the case of that person or people breaching that trust, or as I said, even accidentally, things happen. So that's what we're trying to minimize. So there's some examples of kind of administrative controls. Moving on to technical controls. So it's easy enough to tell people what they shouldn't be doing, or tell people what they should be doing, or telling people that they shouldn't be accessing that. But as I said, unfortunately, we need to enforce those. We need to make sure that if someone did get curious about what's in that HR folder, that they can't access it. So this is where we use technical controls. So traditionally, things like firewalls and antivirus and security software, spam filtering helps with stopping external people from accessing that data and trying to hack in, and those aspects of it are still as important as ever. But when we're looking at information security, the other aspect of it is making sure that your policies are enforced, and also easily manageable is probably another huge aspect of it. Just having policies that you're assuming either assuming that people are adhering to, or needing somebody to walk around and make sure that it's adhering to. It's just not practical. It's not a realistic thing to do, which is why we look at technical controls. So traditionally we've had server folders. Data is stored on the server. Users can access certain server folders, and that's done with permissions. Certain users have certain permissions, certain user groups have certain permissions. HR team has access to the HR folder, finance team has access to the finance folder, and it's locked down in that sense. Things have changed a lot. Server folders are still relevant, and things like SharePoint still has permissions, and it still does folder permissions in a very similar way. But with cloud, moving to Office 365, moving to Microsoft 365, we've got a lot of information that's now in the cloud, and Microsoft has a huge amount of security features that will allow you to secure your data. Whether that is secure it from internal threats, which again include accidental, or external threats from hackers. Microsoft 365 has a number of built-in tools, the majority of which come with Microsoft 365 business premium licenses, which the majority of people with Microsoft 365 will more than likely have that license, and I'll go on to that more a little while later. So within Microsoft 365 there's something called information protection, as well as data loss prevention, and again they are some slight simplifications, but I will go into it in more detail. So Microsoft 365 information protection, also known as Azure Information Protection, and there's also another new name now, but this is Microsoft 365. They will introduce new names constantly, but along with that they tend to introduce new features, and they tend to improve on current features. So it's ever evolving, and Microsoft's security functions are continuing to grow. But with regards to information protection, so with the features within Microsoft 365, they can aid with defining that data. So that was one of the initial steps you know, discovering that data and defining that data. As I said, it can help. It's not going to do it for you, but it can help you, and it can potentially speed up the process quite significantly. Data classification, and again, I'll get more onto that in a moment. Data loss and leak prevention. So making sure that data that shouldn't go outside of the company doesn't. And this does go hand in hand with data classification. Data lifecycle management, auditing, and encryption. So there's a number of aspects within Microsoft 365, and this is, again, just a few of them. You know, these are the more common ones. So data classification within Microsoft 365. So in our previous steps, we've classified that data. You know, we've discovered the data. We know what we've got. We've defined labels. We've defined the data. We've classified that data. We know what labels to attach to that data. But what does that mean? Microsoft 365 allows us to do a number of things with that. It allows us to set up policies. So data classification policies, you would set a policy up for each classification that you created. So we would create a confidential policy, would create a private policy, would create a public policy, etc. And within those policies, we can set rules, and we can set rules that are automatically enforced. So say for confidential, the highest level, if you tag something as confidential, then you could set it so that it means that that document is not allowed out of the organization. Users aren't allowed to email it. Users aren't allowed to share it within SharePoint, for example. Users, even to the point of, you know, not allowing screenshots, you know, through the computer. Obviously, if someone wants to take a photo of the screen, not much you can do about that. But you know, it gives that that level and more of restriction. And then obviously, you know, restrictions cascading down depending on the level of classification that you choose. And again, you know, because these policies can be created, they can be customized. You know, if something is marked as confidential, it will also allow for restrictions of who can access it. And it also combines with the data ownership side of things. So if you're the one to classify that data, or if head of finance classifies a specific document as confidential, then that would mark him or them, sorry, as the owner of that document. And the other aspect of it is that a default classification can be configured. So rather than when a document is created, rather than just having it as a document and it being there and waiting to be classified, you can set a default classification so that, you know, until that data is properly classified, there's certain restrictions to it. You know, what you don't want is, you know, a document that's been created that should be classified as confidential, but someone forgets to do it. So what you want is for that default classification to be quite restrictive until a more specific classification has been configured. And what that will allow will just mean that information just can't just be leaked because the classification wasn't provided. And again, you know, it can be customized to the organization. That might not be appropriate for what you do. It should be highly recommended, but it's not. You know, it's not necessarily the way that the organization wants to work. So that's the kind of the data classification side, and you know, this is how the information can be enforced. And obviously this will work within you know, within Exchange, within your, you know, your emails, within SharePoint, within Teams, you know, even on your Windows 10 device. You know, those restrictions can be enforced across that. And it just means that that data is secure. It means that there can't be any accidental deletion of documents, or, you know, accidental emailing of documents. And, you know, there's always been mistakes of, you know, emailing the wrong document to somebody. You know, it should be the redacted version instead of the full version. You know, and by classifying that data, you know, you've got one, or you know, you've got the redacted document classed as public, and you've got the unredacted version classed as confidential, for example. You know, things like that, things that will help people and help the organization from, you know, either making those mistakes or, you know, as I said, even maliciously. So moving on to, data loss, data leak prevention within Microsoft 365. So again, policies can be created, and Microsoft 365 can automatically identify information within documents. So this is where the data loss prevention kind of comes in really handy. You know, it uses artificial intelligence, which is definitely a buzzword at the moment, but it can identify things within documents. So you create policies that say that you want to make sure that any credit card numbers that are on the system get redacted or get censored. Or things like, you know, personal identifying information. So if it senses those or finds that information within documents, then it can automatically put data classification policies on those. You know, it can class them as private information, and again, you know, it makes sure that that information isn't in the wild in your organization, and that, you know, if you've got a policy that says that no passwords should be written down, no passwords should be saved in documents, then this bit of software can enforce that. And it can look for text within a document that looks like it could be a password. You know, there's huge lists, and it does it well. But it also has you know, pre-made policies that are specific to things like GDPR, medical information. You know, there is a lot of specific regulatory policies that are already there that can just be, you know, switched on, and you know, it puts a tick in the box. So yeah, so you know, those data loss prevention policies can automatically add classifications to the documents. They can put restrictions on that documentation, and you know, if needed, they can alert kind of administrators, or they can alert senior management if certain information is trying to be either sent outside the organization or accessed. Again, you know, highly customizable, and you know, something that you know, needs to be looked at and kind of planned. It can also help with the information life cycle management. So, you know, we can create archive policies, retention policies, and you know, disposition review and policies, and proof of disposition. You know, retention policies has been something that's been around for a long time, and I think a lot of organizations are, you know, a bit scared to turn it on because they don't want stuff just deleting, which is why, you know, you look at the life cycle, information life cycle management from start to finish. And, you know, if you've got the policies in place, then, you know, retention policies and disposition policies, then having things automatically delete shouldn't be too much of an issue. And it will be, you know, it will make sure that you are not in breach of GDPR. And, you know, you can be safe in the knowledge that, you know, the information that you don't need to keep for longer than 3 years is not kept for longer than 3 years. And again, all of these aspects fit into each other. You know, you can set policies to say that, you know, any information that has, you know, personally identifiable information that you know, is required. And again, it depends on what your organization is. You know, some organizations have, you know, regulations that specify retention policies, sort of 7 years for finance, etc. And you know, all of those policies can be created and can be, you know, combined with all of these aspects. And again, you know, there's a bit of work to do it, but once it's configured and once it's going, then, you know, it's I'm not going to say automated, because it's one of those things that always needs you know, maintenance, tweaking, you know, audits and just making sure it's doing what you need it to do. You know, there's some policies that might need tweaking, etc. So, you know, managing your information. All of this is kind of related to managing that information. And, you know, as I said in the beginning, there's a lot of organizations who just don't know what information is there. And, you know, it could be too late by the time you find out that certain information was where it shouldn't be. So, you know, managing your data is important. And, you know, doing it properly can reduce the surface area of attack, and both, as I said, both internally and externally. You know, reduce the chance for data to leak, again, accidentally or deliberately, ensuring that you're compliant with GDPR as well as, you know, other regulations, and will just generally allow you to manage your data more effectively. It'll allow you to be more, you know, organized, and you know, help with productivity potentially. So yeah, as I mentioned, you know, if you are using Microsoft 365, you may already be licensed for most of the features that we've kind of discussed here. So, you know, speak to us and you know, find out what licenses you've got. Speak to your account manager. Speak to your consultant if you know, this is kind of a project that would, you know, be of interest to you. And in my opinion, it should be something that's done for all businesses, you know, large or small. You know, small businesses that are growing, now is the ideal time to do it before it becomes, you know, a very big project. So give us a, you know, let us know, have a conversation with us with regards to how we can help with all this. You know, with a lot of the governance side of it, we can advise. And obviously with the Microsoft 365 of it, side of it, we can, you know, configure policies with you. We can set those going. So yeah, let us know. Right, any questions? Let me see if right. And from what I can see at the moment, I don't think there is any questions. Give me a moment. No. Okay, well, I mean, obviously, if you have any questions, just add them to the Q&A now. Otherwise, if you have any after the fact, just drop us an email. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions. I hope that was useful. Yeah, sorry, hope that was useful, and that it gives you some bits to go back with, and have a think about. As I said, there is a number of aspects of you know, information governance that I would like to go over. This is just one aspect of it. So we will obviously, when we do more of them, we'll put information out. Yes, there will be a recording. We'll leave it to the marketing team. Will distribute that. Oh, sorry, there is a Martin has given us a question. A list of policies that we should be implementing for information security. There is some default policies, but the problem is that all organizations are slightly different. You know, as far as data protection policies go, data loss protection, sorry. As I said, there is a number of default policies that refer to specific regulations, and within your organization, it's not going to be a one size fits all. So normally when policies are created, it will be a case of you know, customizing that. I mean, I suppose as kind of a default, you should make sure that anything that you consider confidential, you know, doesn't leave the organization, or anything that's considered confidential is encrypted by default, for example. So, you know, things like that really. You know, as far as other restrictions go, it needs to be looked at. Right. If there is no more questions, then I think that will be it. So no, thank you all for joining me. And yeah, as I said, if you've got any additional questions after the fact, then just let us know.